Welcome to another awesome Daily Spark podcast. Today we have Bob Sornson. Bob will be speaking with us today about self-regulation. Bob strongly believes that self-regulation is the most important characteristic necessary for school success. In this interview, Bob will answer the following questions. Why is self-regulation important, and how does it regulate the approaches towards learning? And how we can help infants and toddlers begin to develop this important skill. Bob gives awesome advice why children who are able to self-regulate can do things like handle strong emotions, tolerate frustration, control their impulses, follow rules and expectations, and pay attention in the classroom to delay gratification. Bob also shares why children who are able to regulate or manage their emotions and behavior do better in school and have an easier time getting along with peers. He also shares the ages that all learning for infants and toddlers happen within the content of their relationship with nurturing and responsive adults. Bob shares how self-regulation helps a child to regulate himself to manage his reactions to sensations inside and outside the body.
Good morning.
Good morning, Rosetta.
Good morning, Bob Sornson. How are you today?
I am very well, thank you.
Our listeners are glad to have you on our podcast this morning. So let's get started.
Thank you.
Tell me about the moment you realized you wanted to educate young children.
Well, I started out as a high school special education teacher, and I loved that job. I did it for about 12 years at the beginning of my professional career. And one of the things that I noticed during those years was that a fair number of the students who were coming to me in high school actually had a lot of learning skills. They had the capacity for learning, and they could demonstrate that in one way or another. But for some reason, they had not developed very good reading skills and or math skills and or self-regulation skills. Sometimes I would see a kid that had a lot of potential, but he was coming in at a second grade reading level or a first grade mathematics level. And that puzzled me until after a while I realized the patterns of kids with good ability, but who for some reason get behind the delivery of the standardized curriculum that we have. And once they get behind, they disengage, they get frustrated, they stop trying. Sometimes they misbehave a little bit, and they start falling further and further and further behind. So I got pretty good at figuring out how to help high school kids, and it wasn't too long before people started to ask me to evaluate their middle school students or their elementary students or occasionally even their preschool students to figure out what was their strength, their learning strength, what were their learning weaknesses, what were the interventions that we could use that would really make a difference right now. And so I started to look closer and closer at those younger children, knowing that the real answer was to not let them get into patterns of frustration and failure and disengagement.
Okay. Let me see. Tell me about the day when you decided to establish the Early Learning Foundation.
Well, I first started the Early Learning Foundation in the fall of 2001. And I guess there were a couple of factors. One of them was 9/11. 9/11 was kind of a wake-up call for many people. It made you sort of stop and think. And one of the things that I thought about was, what do I really want to accomplish? What could I do that would make a difference in this world that would affect a whole lot of people, a whole lot of families, maybe even societies and groups of people that desperately needed a little help? And I couldn't find a single thing in my basket of skills that could make a bigger difference than trying to find systematic ways to help lots more kids be successful in the early years of learning. By that point in time, I was a central office administrator in Northville, Michigan, a fairly large and fairly affluent system outside of the city of Detroit. And one of the things I had done there was to create an early learning initiative so that rather than waiting until kids were in fourth or fifth grade and were eligible for special education services, we started to look very carefully at kids in the earlier grades and try to really understand what they were able to do, what they might be struggling with, how to intervene as quickly and efficiently as possible. Partly, our goal was to reduce the number of kids that needed to go into special education. And we did that to an incredible degree. Our rate of identification for special ed after a few years was about 5.3% when the state average was about 14.2%. So we didn't make it hard to get into special education. We simply intervened when we so-called legally didn't have to. We weren't required to do so because they didn't have any eligibility, but they needed the intervention as quickly and effectively as possible. And what we found was that we could help an awful lot of kids become good learners and stay good learners, and that a whole lot of kids that may not ever have been eligible for special ed also benefited from us looking carefully and systematically at young learners and trying to make sure that they don't have any gaps and they don't ever get into that pattern of falling behind. And so the success of that initiative was something that many people had started to ask me to share. And by setting up the Early Learning Foundation, I was able to expand my ability to go around and try to help people understand all of the important domains of early learning, including things like basic motor skills, both gross motor and fine motor, including things like self-regulation, the capacity to manage yourself, including things like social emotional skills, the foundation for so many of life's successes, including things like oral language, including things like taking the time to fall in love with learning, find out what you're interested in, explore things that make you fall in love with learning for life. All that's a part of what we should be providing our young children during these early learning years.
Okay, now you mentioned self-regulation. Can you expand more on that? Like, what is the importance of self-regulation in the early age?
Oh, boy. Self-regulation is the capacity to calm yourself when you need to focus on something and not get distracted by a whole bunch of other things that might be going on around you. To be able to persist, to keep on hanging in there, even when things get hard or a little bit boring or something else comes along that you might rather do. To be able to delay gratification, not think that you always need to get what you want right now. Essentially, to manage yourself on the inside so that you can adapt to the situations you're in. Get excited and loud when you're outside and playing and having a good time, but knowing that when mom talks or when the teacher talks, I'd better quiet down and listen a little bit, and being able to do that self-management. Simply put, self-regulation predicts which kids are going to be successful in school. Self-regulation predicts which kids are going to be successful on the job, in relationships, and pretty much in every aspect of life. Self-regulation is a better predictor of success in school than is IQ or SAT or ACT or any other kind of test score you could ever ascribe to a child. Self-regulation is an important predictor of all kinds of good things. And here's a point I guess I'll make. The best time to help kids develop self-regulation, the time in which there is a neurologic window of opportunity, is birth through age 4. That's the best time. Okay. Second best phase is from 4 all the way up to adolescence. But if we do not help kids learn the foundations of self-regulation before adolescence, it's really neurologically difficult for them to do so. It is so much harder. So we have a responsibility in our homes, in our families, and also in school to give kids this crucial ingredient for success. There's no success in life without self-regulation.
Yes, I agree with you. This reminds me of a quote about self-regulation. It says that self-regulation stands in relation to relation, the way self-important stands in relation to important. And this was a quote by William Bitler. So I can understand why you're so strong and have a strong emotion about this early learning and the importance of self-regulation.
I'll add
Now,
one more. I'll add
yes.
one more thing to that, if I may. When kids get to the point where they can self-regulate and manage themselves on the inside, they get to that calm, strong place. That is pretty much a prerequisite to something that I also think is pretty important, and that is the capacity for empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you can calm yourself and stop worrying and thinking about all your own issues and your own little worries and frustrations, unless you can get calm and strong enough on the inside to actually look outside of yourself and notice what's going on with other people, that's the beginning of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
So self-regulation is the foundation for the development of empathy, which is a foundation for all of your social emotional skills, and a pretty important thing in terms of the quality of our society as well.
Okay. Very good. What was the vision you had for yourself when you started teaching children about self-regulation?
Well, I write books for children, and some of those do teach the kids a little bit about self-regulation. But really, most of my work with self-reg has to do with teaching parents and or teaching teachers. So it's our responsibility as parents to set up family routines, good bedtime routines, good morning routines, good mealtime routines, those kinds of things that make kids kind of go along with the program here at home. And in the process of going along with family routines, especially high quality routines, which are really nice times of the day, routines are embedded with self-regulation, helping kids learn to manage little frustrations, calm themselves down, helping kids see that arguing with mom or dad isn't going to work, calm themselves down, helping kids understand that every once in a while you might go to thinking time, calm yourself down, creating those circumstances. Same thing at school. A really well-managed classroom, a really high-quality teacher creates routines in the classroom for coming into the class, for transitions, for snack time, for going to lunch, for going on the playground. So kids learn what appropriate behavior looks like, and then they can self-regulate and choose those behavior patterns. Good teachers, good parents give kids opportunities to develop that self-regulation. Otherwise, it won't develop.
Yes, I agree with you. And also, as far as the family is concerned, the teacher should not be afraid to ask the family what their child's self-smoothing behaviors are and how they are supported through behavior. Like carrying a blanket might be okay for some families, but not for others. So it's important that we learn about self-smoothing for the child in the home environment.
And you know, as a teacher, how great it is when we can get the parents to work with us and develop a team. Boy, that team has power, doesn't it?
Yes, really, it does. It does. Yes, it's a strong connection, bonding. Yes, I agree with you. What was the most challenging part in educating young minds about self-regulation and empathy?
Yeah, I'll tell you, the hard part is not educating the kids for me. Pretty much never has been. I mean, there are kids that are harder than others, but by far the hardest part for me is sometimes getting adults to change their behaviors. So, for example, let's look at school environments. The typical school environment these days is so rushed and so busy, and teachers have so many things to give their time to and so much content that they feel they need to race through. In that kind of a racing, rushed, high-pressure environment, a whole lot of teachers aren't taking time for the basics. And here the basics, I think, are building relationships with kids, creating wonderful classroom routines, letting kids get to know each other and trust each other and feel safe in this classroom. Those are foundational to good learning. They're also foundational to social skills and developing self-regulation and developing good play skills and all of the rest. And so working with adults and getting our systems to be responsive to good ideas and to change in some cases from the patterns that we have in our schools. To some degree, the same is true with parents, although with parents, I just love working with parents. I find that if we offer really high quality parent education, parents show up, they emotionally open up, and they really want to learn to do the right thing by their children. But most schools and most churches and most communities don't have that high quality parent education available nearly to the degree that we should.
How do you get parents to support you?
I guess that's not tough once you create something that adds value to their lives. So if I'm teaching parents, I find that within a very short amount of time, usually just minutes, they open up, they begin to trust, they share their stories, they tell me stories that are just kind of amazing, things that come out of their mouths that make my jaw drop some days. So getting parents to trust me and work with me has never been a large or a long-term challenge. Getting schools to change right now, I think, is a special challenge because schools have become high-stress environments. And you probably know that anybody, when they're in a high-stress state, whether it's a kid or a parent or a teacher or you or me, when we're in a high-stress state, we are not in our best thinking, listening, learning state of mind. And a lot of principals and an awful lot of teachers are in a high stress state. And they're not doing some of the best thinking, listening, learning. And we certainly aren't seeing the kind of change to our educational systems that I would ask people to consider.
Okay, if you could make one change right now in the system, what would that be?
I would change our educational systems away from what's called a curriculum-driven, content-driven framework and turn instead to a thing called competency-based learning. It's a real simple idea. It means I'm going to give kids what they need at their level of readiness for as long as necessary until that skill is completely and absolutely developed. So, for example, if I were teaching a child to ride a bike, I would not use a pacing guide. I would not treat every child as if he or she were the same as some kid in a script or in a program that I read somewhere. I would observe them. I would carefully work with them, interact with them, play with them, make it fun. If a child needed training wheels for a longer duration of time, he would get training wheels for a longer duration of time. If he needed me to run next to his bike once we took those training wheels off, I would do that for as long as necessary until the balance was good and the confidence was good and he or she is completely ready to go on their own. The idea that we deliver content to all second graders in exactly the same way and in exactly the same time frame. The idea that we deliver content to kindergartners using a pacing guide, acting as if they are all at the same level of developmental readiness, learning readiness, is crazy. And so we need to identify the things that kids need to learn well and carefully personalize education. What we're doing now is following the script and the system that was developed back in the 1840s when Horace Mann brought an educational system to Massachusetts that was based on the one over in Prussia. It was a grade 1 through 8 system. There was a standard first grade curriculum, a standard second grade curriculum, and so forth. We still basically use that standard one-size-fits-all curriculum. But in this day and age, learning matters. In Horace Mann's day, it really wasn't necessary for people to stay around in school for year after year after year, become really high-level good readers, high-level good mathematicians. Academic learning was not as important as it is today. Today, learning skills matter. They're going to matter in the kind of jobs that you can get. the kind of families and lives that you can build. And kids that have good self-regulation and good learning skills are going to have a world of opportunity. But if you don't have good self-regulation and good learning skills, you're going to have a tough time in this life. It's a tough path waiting for you. So I think we need to take the time, rethink the way we deliver learning to kids, especially in the young years, and never push kids into frustration or disengagement.
Oh, I agree with you. I see so many children now that are just frustrated with school, just frustrated with just the act of having to learn. That's no fun. It just discourages them about coming to school and just learning, and it gives them, they just have no value when it comes to education. So what you're saying is so important, and I'm just hoping that our young teachers, our new teachers, are listening to you and appreciating this valuable information that you are sharing with us. And
I would go so far as to say that any system that pushes children into disengagement, you and I were talking a little bit earlier, in Rochester Public Schools in New York State, Rochester is the lowest performing public school system in the state. It's only 5.6% of their eighth graders who can read at level by the eighth grade, according to their state test. 5.6% can read at level, meaning about 95% of the kids in that district have fallen into frustration, which is very possibly going to lead them into disengagement. In my way of looking at the world, that is a big deal. I would say any system that pushes kids into disengagement is engaging in what to me is a wrong, I would even call it a crime against children. It matters that kids learn to learn, love to read, love to think in numbers, love to learn to problem solve, love to learn to work together. Mm-hmm. It matters. Yes. And when we allow systems to push kids into disengagement, we have done harm.
Yes. And this is basic skills for life, what we're teaching them, self-regulation.
It sure is, isn't it? You and I have been trying to practice it all of our lives, haven't we?
Yes. Okay. How do you measure your success right now? You seem so knowledgeable about the areas of self-regulation.
One of the things I measure my success right now a couple of ways. There are days when I ask myself, Bob, why are you still doing this? You don't need to. You've been doing it a long time. Other people at your age and with your experience have just gone to Florida or started to do something else. But I have a passion for this and a need to try to help every child I see in a school matters to me. Yeah, there is a connection and there's something for me that I need to try to do. Mm-hmm. So there are basically two ways that I measure my success right now. One is in creating relationships with schools and or districts that would like to become competency based. And I will go and help them learn to do that. In fact, I'll even give them the competency framework that we use for preschool, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and third grade. If young children have those skills at that second and third grade framework level, they will probably be good, successful, engaged, happy learners for life. That foundation is established. It's built. Those kids will probably be good learners for life. They'll probably produce good test scores, although that should never be my first priority. So finding districts and schools where there is really good, thoughtful leadership who could actually manage to push the edges a little bit and change the standard practice that we see out there in so many schools, which frankly is just not working. It's not any better. The product, the outcome that we have today in this country is not one lick better than when we started to measure national outcomes back in the early 1970s. All the school reform stuff, all of the race to the top stuff, all of the school improvement grants, millions, trillions, billions of dollars. It has not produced any improvement in our national outcomes. And sadly, when you look around the world, other nations are getting better and we are not. Okay. So finding those places that would like to work and create change is one part of that. And then the second part of it for me is the satisfaction that I get from working with good teachers and groups of parents. When adults come and they open their hearts and they open their minds to learning, that is just an extraordinarily great feeling for me as the teacher. And so every moment that I'm engaged in teacher training and or parent training is a moment of fun and almost pure pleasure.
Very good. Your teacher training, do you do international or national, or can you share with us about your teacher training?
Absolutely. I've worked in 48 of the American states. I only have 2 where I've visited the other 2, but I haven't taught in South Carolina and Alaska. Those are the only 2 that for some reason I haven't taught in so far. But we have model sites for early learning success in Mississippi and in several communities in Michigan. And we have bits and pieces of what we do, essential math skills and other kinds of things all around the country and sometimes all around the world. So a couple of days ago, I was having a Skype meeting like this with some folks in India who have a couple of private schools, and they would like to change the very standardized teacher-centered classroom experience that most people experience in India and move to a personalized competency-based system. We've had projects in Central America. So, yeah, I do a fair amount of traveling. That gets old after a while, but working with people never gets old.
No, it doesn't. Thank you for that information. Now, where can our listeners go to learn more about you?
They can go to earlylearningfoundation.com, earlylearningfoundation.com. And you can find out a whole lot about me, but you can also read a whole bunch of interesting information. You might, especially if you're an early childhood educator, find some information about our competency-based learning systems and the essential skill inventories. What we find is that when teachers get skilled and learn how to use the essential skill inventories as a framework for competency-based learning, here's what teachers tell us. They become better observers of children. They develop better relationships with kids. They differentiate instruction far more effectively. And here's the part that I like. They love to come to work. They love to do what they're doing because they feel like they are doing it more effectively. The other part of that is in a competency-based system, you're not rushed. You're not racing. It's not frantic. It doesn't feel like you're being overwhelmed. There is time to go for nature walks, and there is time to do projects and activities that make learning come alive. When you have a narrow, clear set of competencies, and these are the things that don't just get covered. I might have to keep working on one of these skills for months with a child until he or she becomes truly competent. But I'm going to give that child the time and the effort and the instruction and the practice until each and every one of those things becomes absolutely solid. But within that framework, you can have a whole lot more fun. You can personalize education. Teachers feel like professionals. And we could bring in nature, we can bring in art and music and beauty. And beauty should be a part of our early childhood classrooms.
Oh, yes. Beauty, that's a powerful word in the classroom. Yes. And that's a visual thing. And our children need to see visual things, especially for our visual learners. Now, do you have anything else you would like to share with our listeners?
I would say this to teachers today. I'm going to especially focus in a little bit on new teachers. There are a lot of folks that are staying away from the world of education, choosing other careers because you're not so crazy perhaps about what you've heard about schools or what you've experienced in schools. Or maybe you know that the culture, the organizational culture in many school districts is not what you would choose for yourself. But I'll say this. This is one of the most exciting times to consider being an educator because we're in a time where change is absolutely necessary. Our outcomes are not improving. Our outcomes are not sufficient to fill the jobs that we have in this country, and they're certainly not sufficient to give a large majority of kids the skills to build great lives out there in the world. Mm-hmm. We need to find a better way, and it's going to come, and it's going to come soon. So if you are a really smart, dedicated person who wants to make a difference in this world, there are going to be opportunities in our world of education. Get in, learn something about competency, learn something about how we can restructure the basic framework of our schools and start to make a difference. We need some smart, capable, and stubborn leaders to help us make the changes that are necessary.
Thank you. I'm going to end this interview with that statement. That's a powerful statement. And my advice is to young teachers, new teachers, if you didn't learn anything from this interview, the last 2 minutes are probably the most powerful information that you can learn in your teaching career. And Bob, I would like to thank you for your valuable information, and we will be talking soon. Thank you.
My pleasure.